Hi guys. First of all, the homework. I'm smoking my one of my Falcons. I bought it on the internet and it was so filthy and gunged up. I never thought I had any chance of getting it clean enough to smoke. And I'm smoking Peter Stokerby's Balkan mix. I'm getting more and more happy with Balkan mixtures and liking them, that I think they're going to be a very big part of my regular smoking regime. But I'm really asking for some advice, I suppose. I know there's a lot of videos around about storage and different ways of storing your tobacco. But the advice I want concerns storage in and where best to store it. I hear so many things now, some saying that tins aren't really suitable for storing anymore, others saying that you should store them in particular types of glassware, bottles, and I'm storing mine in two different types. One is the clip down Kilner jar, and the other is the type of coffee jars that have a plastic seal as you push them in to make them airtight. I think they're all right, but if anybody disagrees, just say so. I also have got a couple of some in tins that I'm storing. I'm really lucky because my wife says I can smoke indoors, and where I'm storing them at the moment are on two shelves next to my chair, so that I can reach out and get the ones that I'm not storing and load my pipe and gently puff away. And the ones that I'm storing, I can reach out reverently and just stroke the side of the bottles, just to let them know that they're loved and looked after. But whilst my wife doesn't mind me smoking, she's beginning to look suspicious at me whenever I come in with another tin of tobacco. And it's that worried look that says, I hope he's not going to use another jar. You've got to be so careful with wives. If they see you stroking somebody else, they don't like it. And once you start loving tobacco jars with tobacco in, it's a shock. But I won't say more of that now because she's sat right behind me. You might be able to see her there in the distance, waving. Yes, she does that so she keeps an eye on what I say. But don't let her. Yeah. Well, anyway, the problem I've got is storage space, really. Now, in the garage, I've got a pine chest with the lid on, and I wondered about storing them in there, and storing them in the garage, and having my workbench there with the pipes and that kind of thing. But the problem with the garage, maybe, is that if we have a bad winter, it's very cold in there. And even the washing machine's been known to freeze. So can tobacco survive that, I suppose I'm saying? Or if I bring it in, if I get something indoors, I noticed that one of our members had got a lovely cupboard that he'd got at a very reasonable price in the States to store his stuff in, and it was closed and was a lovely piece of furniture in a way, and when you opened it you could see where everything was. But what I'm really wanting is to know that I'm storing things right, that they're not going to go haywire with me. I mean, people are even talking about tins exploding and blowing off their lids. Now, I don't think I'm going to be storing mine that long because I'm in my second half of the 60s. So, at best I've only got another 40 years. But any advice that you can give, I'd be grateful for. I'm going to finish with a couple of stories about the church and about priesthood and about some of the things that go on. And I'm going to do that because some of the members have asked me to. The three stories I'm going to tell you are true. I'm not going to use names, I'm not going to use places, and I'm going to try and keep things as anonymous as possible. And I won't be using confessional material, obviously, because I'm saving that for me memoirs. When my memoirs are published, if they're ever published, the high and the mighty of the land will duck. But that's beside the point. The first story is quite a nice little story about a bishop and his chaplain who was sat in evensong in the cathedral, and the bishop suddenly turned to the chaplain and said, "I need to go to the toilet." So his chaplain, as chaplains are wont to do, decided what was the best solution to this problem and suggested that when the psalms started, the bishop slipped out of his throne and gently went behind it and went to the toilet. Not behind the throne, but made his way to the toilet, which the bishop did. The psalm started, and the bishop got out of his seat and eased his way round the throne and to a back passage that led round the cathedral. The only problem was that the bishop had forgotten to turn his microphone off. Now, it was all right, the choir was singing, so they couldn't hear him moving. But when the poor man got to the toilet, his footsteps resounded over the PA system, and he was heard merrily whistling to ease things along, because he was at our particular age where sometimes that's necessary. Then there was the sound, shall we say, of running water, let's call it that. And then a great big sigh of satisfaction. Now, by this time, the choir were desperately struggling to sing at all, never mind sing in tune. And the congregation was stuffing handkerchiefs in their mouths and had tears running down their faces. I'm sure of sympathy, although one or two were cruel enough not to smother their laughter with their handkerchiefs. But anyway, the bishop makes his way back to his throne and sits down, turns to his chaplain and said, "I don't think anybody noticed, do you?" And his chaplain looked him in the eye and said, "No, Bishop, I'm sure that no one noticed." Even bishops can have problems with microphones. The second story is the same clergyman. This time he's in a parish, and they're wanting to build a parish hall. Now, this hall's going to cost a lot of money. But like most parishioners, they have no concept of money. You know, you can say the hall's going to cost £500,000, say. And they'll argue about whether the cups they buy should be the fourpenny ones or the sixpenny ones. You know, because they can handle that, a cup, sixpence, you know, or whatever. But they can't conceive of £500,000. But anyway, he eventually gets them to agree to the plans and that kind of thing. But then there's this woman on the PCC, the governing body of the church, and she is quite concerned. By this time, the priest's looking at his watch. It's nearly time for Coronation Street or whatever priests watch when they go home. But the woman was going on, and I hope we're not going to allow the playing of cards and dancing in the hall. And she went on about reverence to God and holiness and all this kind of thing. And eventually the clergyman, losing his temper slightly, said, "Are we having toilets in the church?" And the lady said, "Well, I hope so. Yes, we must have toilets for the ladies, and we must have adequate toilets for the ladies." And he said, "Yes, that's what I thought." And he said, "Well, if God isn't going to worry about us shitting in church in the toilets, I'm sure he's not going to worry about us dancing in the hall." And you can imagine the laughter that went round the PCC, and the bishop looking slightly embarrassed that he'd used such an earthy word. And the final story is about Portsmouth Cathedral, and I will use the name of the cathedral for that because it would be obvious which one it is. They were dedicating a D-Day window, and the Queen Mother was going to be there because she was a great supporter of the D-Day fellowships and of the armed forces. And the window was what we called the Marmalade Christ. It's a lovely designed window, but from a distance it looked as if our Lord and everything else was a particular shade of orange. But as part of this celebration, because it was the D-Day anniversaries, ambassadors from all the countries were going to be present at the service. And we had to sort things out. My friend and I were there on placement from our college, and we were given the position of honorary canons, so that meant that we were in on all the inner meetings. And on this particular meeting, the ambassadors' representatives came to the Dawson House, and we had coffee and that kind of thing, and we're laying down a few guidelines. Now, the Dean of the Cathedral had no objections to uniformed soldiers carrying their rifles in procession and that kind of thing. They knew what they were doing, they knew where to put them and to carry on. But he said to the ambassadors' representatives, "Look, we're not happy about concealed sidearms carried by your bodyguards, and we would prefer not to have them in the cathedral." Well, one ambassador's assistant said, "Under no circumstances will we do away with our sidearms. We have to be aware of our ambassador's safety, and we're not sure that security will be good enough." Others immediately said, "Yes, that's all right. We'll lock the sidearms safely away for the duration of the service." Eventually, things were sorted out to everyone's satisfaction. We then had the British Legion come in. The British Legion's an organisation of retired soldiers and sailors and airmen, and they support the armed forces. They're a charity, and they do a lot of good work, including the Poppy Day. They would be in uniform, and they would have a guard of banner bearers. Now, we explained to the banner bearers that because of room, they would be going down and standing behind the ambassadors. And there would be a point, as usual, where the banners would be lowered reverently. Now, this is usually done straight down in front to the floor level. But you can imagine you couldn't do that with the ambassadors sat in front of you. So we suggested that they move them to the side and lowered them reverently. And that way, everything would be all right. They agreed with this and saw the sense of it. But unfortunately, before the service began, they decided that they needed to settle their nerves. And the best way to do this would be to visit the pub that the cathedral used, which was across the road, and they would have a flagon of ale or two just to settle the nerves. Well, the service started and people began to process in, and the banner bearers processed in, wobbling their way down the cathedral, looking decidedly unsteady and various shades of green. Eventually they stood in their positions, upright, stout men, just swaying slightly. But unfortunately, when it came to the lowering of the banners, they'd forgotten everything that we decided, and the banners went slap down out in front of them, and the ambassadors each disappeared behind their own banner, which was unfortunate because at this point in the service they were supposed to be looking resolute and proud and all together and opposite the Queen Mother, who was head down. I think she was praying, but her shoulders kept shaking, so I'm not quite sure how much. But anyway, the rest of the service went reasonably well, and they processed out at the end, and everything was all right. I'm not going to tell you any stories about me and about my mishaps, because I know you really don't want to hear those. And I'm not going to tell you about the time when a funeral director was caught speeding. I might do later though. But I would really appreciate some advice on storage and that kind of thing. Thank you.